Today, what I'm going to be doing is going over in a brief summary form a lesson that I just taught at our church. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I introduced observation of a book as a whole to my church. And so I just want to just go briefly over what I did. Okay. Now, of course, we're in the observation step, which relates to the idea of, what do you see? But we're dealing with at the level of a book as a whole. And the reason we want to be doing this is because whenever we are preparing for Sunday school teaching, or whether you're preparing for a sermon, or if you're a student of the Bible that just wants to get an idea of a particular book, like for example, we're going to be in 2 Samuel next month. And so these steps can be applied to 2 Samuel. So the reason we want to do this is because it helps you become more accurate in your observation, of course, which leads to interpretation and then to application. It helps you pinpoint that application. Okay, so the first thing that we see here is that you have observation of the book of a whole, and we're going to be dividing it up into a few steps, and I'll highlight them right here. First, you identify the general materials, which I'll explain in a moment. Then you describe the structure of the book. Then you identify major structure relationships of the book. You ask interpretive questions concerning the structure of the book. You locate key passages of strategic areas of the book. And you identify higher critical data within the book. And then last of all, you note other major impressions. And so you could do this one reading at a time, or you could do it all at once. But basically what you're doing to the text is you're trying to get a general impression of things. General materials is what you think the book is made out of. This is not the same idea as genre, which relates more to the idea of literary structure. Rather, your general material options are biographical, which focus on people, historical, which focus on events, chronological, which focuses on time, geographical, which focuses on location, and ideological, which focuses on ideas. Okay, so we're in the book of Acts, and most people believe that the book of Acts is has geographical general materials based on Acts 1:8. You should be my witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Okay, so after you identify the general materials, you want to describe the structure of the book. Now, what you could do is you could read through a book and you could note the shifts of emphasis. Like say if you say it's geographical, then you would note the shifts of emphasis where you see a geographical shift. But another thing that you can do, because of ministry constraints, time constraints, other responsibilities, is that you can you can type into your computer, a search engine, Constable's Notes, and then say the book of Acts. So Constable's Notes, Acts, and then type that in, and the first thing you see will be Constable's Notes, which is a commentary that's updated every year, basically. And it has outlines within it. And I've actually shown this in other videos, and I showed it to them, and I had everybody in the room located on their phone, and everybody was able to find it, so it's not difficult to find. So by that, you're able to look and see the structural relationships. The structure of the book. So the next thing you would do is identify the main units and subunits within the book. And so these correspond to the Roman numeral 1 and the subpoints underneath that you would find in Constable's Notes outline, which I have placed here together in kind of like a jumbled format here. So I have witness in Jerusalem 1 through 6, and then you have the subpoints next to it. Then you have the witness in Judea and Samaria 6 through 9, and their subpoints next to it, and the witness to the uttermost part of the earth, and then their subpoints. Our passage is in Acts 13, so it relates to that. And so the extension of the church into Syria, Antioch has just occurred. Now the church is extending into Cyprus and Asia Minor. Okay, so after you identify these main units and subunits of a book through looking at a pre-existing outline, the next thing you would do is you would try to identify major structural relationships within the book. Now, I've exposed my church to some of these, and my friend Josh has exposed it to them by what we call the lampposts, by looking at conjunctions, words like that, the key words that pop out and let you know what's going on, like purpose and result and things like that. But the example that I gave tonight was in the book of Acts. You have the concept of climax, because in Acts 1:8, you have the idea of them being a witness to Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And then at the end of the book, you have that Paul is in his house, under house arrest, unhindered, teaching and preaching. And so that's the climax of the book. So that's like a major thing. So just like when you're watching a movie or reading a book, looking for a climax or that climatic moment can be helpful. Now, the next thing you would do is you would want to ask interpretive questions concerning the structure of the book. So you might want to ask questions about, okay, why is there a shift going on geographically in the particular passage you're in? Or you may ask questions about, why is the climax mentioned here? I mean, it's the very last sentence of the book, but it doesn't include everything about Paul's life. Whether Paul was dead at the time of its writing or not, those are questions that you could dig into. Another thing you can do is you can locate key passages, strategic areas within reading the book. So you're reading through, and one thing you see in the book of Acts is these summary statements, basically like the idea that they were all together on one accord, fellowshipping, and they were teaching and preaching and sharing, having all things in common. Those types of statements that you'll see interspersed throughout the book. Then the next thing you do is you want to identify higher critical data within the book. And that's just a big term for background information. But notice that this is background information within the book. Typically, whenever people prepare for sermons or teaching or anything like that, they go to background information first before going to their passage. But what this causes you to do, this causes you to look for information about the author, look for information about the recipient or the audience in the book. You find out background information within the book, what the book tells us about the audience. And this helps us not to read a lot of cultural things that may not necessarily be right from commentators and things like that into the text, or at least gives us something to evaluate all that by. Last of all, you want to note other major impressions. And so this means that anything else that sticks out to you. So with these steps, we zoom in into our particular passage by asking interpretive questions, which are preliminary and tentative. So the first question is, how does our passage reflect our decision about the general materials? In other words, if we saw that Acts is divided up geographical, how does that relate to our passage? Well, we have geographical locations mentioned in our passage, and it's also in the third main section of the book, which relates to the uttermost part of the earth. Okay, the next question is, how does our passage relate to the major units and subunits? Well, the statement I just said also relates to that, because it relates to the uttermost part of the earth, and the subunits for that are describing how it went from the previous section of Syria, Antioch, and now it's going into Cyprus and Asia Minor. So how does this relate to the book being addressed to Theophilus? This idea that when you read the beginning of the book, that it's addressed to a person named Theophilus. Now, Theophilus may be representative of a group of all believers because it means friend of God. I personally believe he's a historical person. I don't know if he's a believer or an unbeliever, but you basically have the idea, both in the book of Luke and in Acts, that stories are written that call you to either have confidence or trust or faith in what God is doing, or to have doubt. And so this passage, as well as everything that we talked about in the book, is to increase Theophilus' confidence in Christianity, that it's an actual movement of God. Theophilus is called Excellent Theophilus, which means he's a political figure. And so it's really interesting that these geographical movements that go on throughout the books, they also relate to political clashes. Because, of course, the Pharisees and the Sadducees with Jerusalem, Judea still being that area region, conflict with the Jews, Samaria with the conflict going on there, and, of course, the transition with going into the Gentile territories. So more specifically, Theophilus would read about the expansion of the church and would be convinced that it was a movement of God and not a movement of man. So he would need to know that. Now, when we go to preliminary and tentative application, we first want to look at primary application, which is what it would mean to the original audience. So Theophilus would have seen how the church continued, but did not command Jewish practices such as fasting. He may have even had knowledge about what the phrase ministering to the Lord meant, because that's a reference, even the NIV translated as worshiping from the Old Testament. It was what the people did in the temple. We see the example in the book of Luke, how Zacharias doubted, but Elizabeth had faith. And then in the previous context of this passage, we have the idea of Rhoda believing that Peter was at the door and other people doubting. Now, secondary application is going down to the level of the church. The church, so I have here, the church must doubt as it does its ministry before the Lord if they want to know his will for future ministry and missions. The Jan Lee application of this is that we need to depend on God as prayer as we work out the 7-year vision that Pastor Marcus proposed for our church. So that deals with the having the prayerful attitude, going to the meetings, seeking God's discernment through the whole process. Personal application for me is related to the idea that the Lord has provided and will continue to provide in his own way and time as he sees fits. In the meantime, I must be responsible. And so that relates to the issue that I've had some setbacks financially recently. I've been hospitalized, car problems, things like that, seminary things. But basically what it comes down to is if God wants me to continue in seminary, then I will continue in seminary. I trust God to provide in his way and his time. So in review of the steps, what we've done is we've identified the general materials, we've described the structure of the book, and we identify a major structure relationship in the book that we illustrated by climax. We asked interpretive questions concerning the structure of the book. We located key passages, strategic areas in the book, and we identified higher critical or background idea within data within the book, and we note other major impressions. And so those are steps that you can use as you go to study a book. So like, for example, if you're doing the Lifeway material, the Explore series, next month we'll be in 2 Samuel. And currently we're in 2 Corinthians right now. We're going to be in there for 2 more weeks. And so you could still apply these steps to that as well. And then in other videos that I have, I talk about how you can study particular sections and there's similarities and differences as it relates to the book as a whole. So my concluding illustration is from the movie Facing the Giants. Basically, there was a coach that was having doubts about things, and there's this man of God that's been praying over the school, the lockers, everything in situation, and he feels led to tell a message for God from him. But really what more important than that idea is that he told him this little parable real fast. He said there were 2 farmers, and God basically said it's going to rain, but only one of them prepared his field for the rain. So which one had more faith or which one doubted? And so the idea being is that, we should have an expectation of that God is going to move. And so what we must do is we must prepare for that, fulfilling our responsibility and be faithful to that. And the example of the text is that we have the option of fasting or in a prayer and other things like that involved. And there's more that I could say about this. I made other outlines related to this, and I may share an additional video. But I just wanted to share the information that I shared with my church in a quick format so that they could get a snapshot view and a refresher of what we went over. So anyway, let me know what y'all think. You have any questions, comments? Let me know about that. Be sure to share this with others. Subscribe. Hit the bell if you want notifications. And like I said, let us know what you think. And keep us in prayer. God bless.